Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. This is episode 28, Book 3, and I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. The band of travelers reaches the land of Glinda the Good, and of course she wants to help the situation in the land of Oz. Glinda has some interesting news, though, that may change the outcome of Queen Jinjur's revolt. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. The Land of Oz. Chapter 19. Dr. Nicodick's Famous Wishing Pills. The Tin Woodman was usually a peaceful man, but when occasion required, he could fight as fiercely as a Roman gladiator. So when the jackdaws nearly knocked him down in their rush of wings, and their sharp beaks and claws threatened to damage his brilliant plating, the woodman picked up his axe and made it whirl swiftly about his head. But although many were beaten off in this way, the birds were so numerous and so brave that they continued the attack as furiously as before. Some of them pecked at the eyes of the gump, which hung over the nest in a helpless condition. But the gump's eyes were of glass and could not be injured. Others of the jackdaws rushed at the sawhorse, but that animal, being still upon his back, kicked out so viciously with his wooden legs that he beat off as many assailants as did the woodman's axe. Finding themselves thus opposed, the birds fell upon the scarecrow's straw which lay at the center of the nest, covering Tip and the wogglebug and Jack's pumpkin head, and began tearing it away and flying off with it, only to let it drop, straw by straw, into the great gulf beneath. The scarecrow's head, noting with dismay this wanton destruction of his interior, cried to the Tin Woodman to save him, and that good friend responded with renewed energy. His axe fairly flashed among the jackdaws, and fortunately the gump began waving the two wings remaining on the left side of its body. The flutter of these great wings filled the jackdaws with terror, and when the gump by its exertions freed itself from the peg of rock on which it hung, and sank flopping into the nest, the alarm of the birds knew no bounds, and they fled screaming over the mountains. When the last foe had disappeared, Tip crawled from under the sofas and assisted the wogglebug to follow him. "We are saved!" shouted the boy delightedly. "We are indeed," responded the educated insect, fairly hugging the stiff head of the gump in his joy. "And we owe it all to the flopping of the thing, and the good axe of the woodman." "If I am saved, get me out of here," called Jack, whose head was still beneath the sofas, and Tip managed to roll the pumpkin out and place it upon its neck again. He also set the sawhorse upright and said to it, "We owe you many thanks for the gallant fight you made." "I think we really have escaped very nicely," remarked the Tin Woodman in a tone of pride. "Not so," exclaimed a hollow voice. At this they all turned in surprise to look at the scarecrow's head, which lay at the back of the nest. "I am completely ruined," declared the scarecrow as he noted their astonishment. "For where's the straw that stuffs my body?" The awful question startled them all. They gazed around the nest with horror, for not a vestige of straw remained. The jackdaws had stolen it to the last wisp, and flung it all into the chasm that yawned for hundreds of feet beneath the nest. "My poor, poor friend," said the Tin Woodman, taking up the scarecrow's head and caressing it tenderly. "Whoever could imagine you would come to this untimely end?" "I did it to save my friends," returned the head, "and I am glad that I perished in so noble and unselfish a manner." "But why are you all so despondent?" inquired the wogglebug. "The scarecrow's clothing is still safe." "Yes," answered the Tin Woodman, "but our friend's clothes are useless without stuffing." "Why not stuff him with money?" asked Tip. "Money?" they all cried in an amazed chorus. "To be sure," said the boy. "In the bottom of this nest are thousands of dollar bills and $2 bills and $5 bills and 10s and 20s and 50s. There are enough of them to stuff a dozen scarecrows. Why not use this money?" The Tin Woodman began to turn over the rubbish with the handle of his axe, and sure enough, what they had first thought only worthless papers were found to be all bills of various denominations, which those mischievous jackdaws had for years been engaged in stealing from the villages and cities they visited. There was an immense fortune lying in that inaccessible nest, and Tip's suggestion was, with the Scarecrow's consent, quickly acted upon. They selected all the newest and cleanest bills and assorted them into various piles. The Scarecrow's left leg and boot were stuffed with $5 bills. His right leg was stuffed with $10 bills, and his body so closely filled with 50s, 100s, and 1000s that he could scarcely button his jacket with comfort. "You are now," said the Wogglebug impressively, when the task had been completed, "the most valuable member of our party, and as you are among faithful friends, there is little danger of your being spent." "Thank you," returned the Scarecrow gratefully. "I feel like a new man, and although at first glance I might be mistaken for a safety deposit vault, I beg you to remember that my brains are still composed of the same old material, and these are the possessions that have always made me a person to be depended upon in an emergency." "Well, the emergency is here," observed Tip, "and unless your brains help us out of it, we shall be compelled to pass the remainder of our lives in this nest." "How about these wishing pills?" inquired the Scarecrow, taking the box from his jacket pocket. "Can't we use them to escape?" "Not unless we can count 17 by 2s, answered the Tin Woodman. "But our friend the Wogglebug claims to be highly educated, so he ought easily to figure out how that can be done." "It isn't a question of education," returned the insect. "It's merely a question of mathematics. I've seen the professor work lots of sums on the blackboard, and he claims anything could be done with X's and Y's and A's and such things by mixing them up with plenty of pluses and minuses and equals and so forth. But he never said anything, so far as I can remember, about counting up to the odd number of 17 by the even number of 2s. "Stop! Stop!" cried the Pumpkinhead. "You're making my head ache." "And mine," added the Scarecrow. "Your mathematics seems to me very like a bottle of mixed pickles. The more you fish for what you want, the less chance you have of getting it. I am certain that if the thing can be accomplished at all, it is in a very simple manner." "Yes," said Tip. "Old Mombi couldn't use X's and minuses, for she never went to school." "Why not start counting at a half of 1?" asked the Sawhorse abruptly. "Then anyone can count up to 17 by 2s very easily." They looked at each other in surprise, for the Sawhorse was considered the most stupid of the entire party. "You make me quite ashamed of myself," said the Scarecrow, bowing low to the Sawhorse. "Nevertheless, the creature is right," declared the Wogglebug, "for twice 1/2 is 1, and if you get to 1, it's very easy to count from 1 up to 17 by 2s. "I wonder I didn't think of that myself," said the Pumpkinhead. "I don't," returned the Scarecrow. "You're no wiser than the rest of us, are you? But let us make a wish at once. Who will swallow the first pill?" "Suppose you do it," suggested Tip. "I can't," said the Scarecrow. "Why not? You've a mouth, haven't you?" asked the boy. "Yes, but my mouth is painted on, and there's no swallow connected with it," answered the Scarecrow. "In fact," he continued, looking from one to another critically, "I believe the boy and the Wogglebug are the only ones in our party that are able to swallow." Observing the truth of this remark, Tip said, "Then I will undertake to make the first wish. Give me one of the silver pills." This the Scarecrow tried to do, but his padded gloves were too clumsy to clutch so small an object, and he held the box toward the boy, while Tip selected one of the pills and swallowed it. "Count!" cried the Scarecrow. 1/2, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, counted Tip. 13, 15, 17. "Now wish," said the Tin Woodman anxiously. But just then the boy began to suffer such fearful pains that he became alarmed. "The pill has poisoned me," he gasped. "Oh, oh, ouch, murder, fire, oh!" and here he rolled upon the bottom of the nest in such contortions that he frightened them all. "What can we do for you? Speak, I beg," entreated the Tin Woodman, tears of sympathy running down his nickel cheeks. I don't know," answered Tip. "Oh, I wish I'd never swallowed that pill." Then, at once, the pain stopped, and the boy rose to his feet again and found the Scarecrow looking with amazement at the end of the pepper box. "What happened?" asked the boy, a little ashamed of his recent exhibition. "Why, the 3 pills are in the box again," said the Scarecrow. "Of course they are," the Wogglebug declared. "Didn't Tip wish that he'd never swallowed one of them? Well, the wish came true, and he didn't swallow one of them. So of course there are 3 in the box." "That may be, but the pill gave me a dreadful pain just the same," said the boy. "Impossible," declared the Wogglebug. "If you have never swallowed it, the pill cannot have given you a pain. And as your wish being granted proves you did not swallow the pill, it's also plain that you suffered no pain." "Then it was a splendid imitation of a pain," retorted Tip angrily. "Suppose you try the next pill yourself. We've wasted 1 wish already." "Oh, no, we haven't," protested the Scarecrow. "Here are still 3 pills in the box, and each pill is good for a wish." "Now you're making my head ache," said Tip. "I can't understand the thing at all, but I won't take another pill, I promise you." And with this remark, he retired sulkily to the back of the nest. "Well," said the Wogglebug, "it remains for me to save us in my most highly magnified and thoroughly educated manner, for I seem to be the only one able and willing to make a wish. Let me have one of the pills." He swallowed it without hesitation, and they all stood admiring his courage, while the insect counted 17 by 2s in the same way that Tip had done. And for some reason, perhaps because Wogglebugs have stronger stomachs than boys, the silver pellet caused it no pain whatever. "I wish the Gump's broken wings mended and as good as new," said the Wogglebug in a slow, impressive voice. All turned to look at the thing, and so quickly had the wish been granted that the Gump lay before them in perfect repair, and as well able to fly through the air as when it had first been brought to life on the roof of the palace. Chapter 20. The Scarecrow Appeals to Glinda the Good. "Hooray!" shouted the Scarecrow gaily. "We can now leave this miserable jackdaw's nest whenever we please." "But it's nearly dark," said the Tin Woodman, "and, unless we wait until morning to make our flight, we may get into more trouble. I don't like these night trips, for one never knows what will happen." So it was decided to wait until daylight, and the adventurers amused themselves in the twilight by searching the jackdaw's nest for treasures. The Wogglebug found 2 handsome bracelets of wrought gold, which fitted his slender arms very well. The Scarecrow took a fancy for rings, of which there were many in the nest. Before long he had fitted a ring to each finger of his padded gloves, and not being content with that display, he added 1 more to each thumb. As he carefully chose those rings set with sparkling stones, such as rubies, amethysts, and sapphires, the Scarecrow's hands now presented a most brilliant appearance. "This nest would be a picnic for Queen Jinjur," he said musingly, "for as nearly as I can make out, she and her girls conquered me merely to rob my city of its emeralds." The Tin Woodman was content with his diamond necklace, and refused to accept any additional decorations. But Tip secured a fine gold watch, which was attached to a heavy fob, and placed it in his pocket with much pride. He also pinned several jeweled brooches to Jack Pumpkinhead's red waistcoat, and attached a lorgnette, by means of a fine chain, to the neck of the sawhorse. "It's very pretty," said the creature, regarding the lorgnette approvingly. "But what's it for?" None of them could answer that question, however, so the sawhorse decided it was some rare decoration, and became very fond of it. That none of the party might be slighted, they ended by placing several large seal rings upon the points of the Gump's antlers, although that odd personage seemed by no means gratified by the attention. Darkness soon fell upon them, and Tip and the Wogglebug went to sleep, while the others sat down to wait patiently for the day. Next morning, they had cause to congratulate themselves upon the useful condition of the Gump, for with daylight, a great flock of jackdaws approached to engage in one more battle for the possession of the nest. But our adventurers did not wait for the assault. They tumbled into the cushioned seats of the sofas as quickly as possible, and Tip gave the word to the Gump to start. At once it rose into the air, the great wings flopping strongly and with regular motions. And in a few moments they were so far from the nest that the chattering jackdaws took possession without any attempt at pursuit. The thing flew due north, going in the same direction from whence it had come. At least, that was the Scarecrow's opinion, and the others agreed that the Scarecrow was the best judge of direction. After passing over several cities and villages, the Gump carried them high above a broad plain where houses became more and more scattered until they disappeared altogether. Next came the wide, sandy desert, separating the rest of the world from the land of Oz. And before noon, they saw the dome-shaped houses that proved they were once more within the borders of their native land. "But the houses and fences are blue," said the Tin Woodman, "and that indicates we are in the land of the Munchkins, and therefore a long distance from Glinda the Good." "What shall we do?" asked the boy, turning to their guide. "I don't know," replied the Scarecrow frankly. "If we were at the Emerald City, we could then move directly southward and so reach our destination. But we dare not go to the Emerald City, and the Gump is probably carrying us further in the wrong direction with every flop of its wings." "Then the Wogglebug must swallow another pill," said Tip decidedly, "and wish us headed in the right direction." "Very well," returned the highly magnified one. "I'm willing." But when the Scarecrow searched in his pocket for the pepper box containing the 2 silver wishing pills, it was not to be found. Filled with anxiety, the voyagers hunted through every inch of the thing for the precious box, but it had disappeared entirely. And still the Gump flew onward, carrying them they knew not where. "I must have left the pepper box in the jackdaw's nest," said the Scarecrow at length. "It's a great misfortune," the Tin Woodman declared. "But we are no worse off than before we discovered the wishing pills." "We are better off," replied Tip, "for the one pill we used has enabled us to escape from that horrible nest. Yet the loss of the other 2 is serious, and I deserve a good scolding for my carelessness," the Scarecrow rejoined penitently. "For in such an unusual party as this, accidents are liable to happen any moment, and even now we may be approaching a new danger." No one dared contradict this, and a dismal silence ensued. The Gump flew steadily on. Suddenly, Tip uttered an exclamation of surprise. "We must have reached the South Country," he cried, "for below us everything is red." Immediately they all leaned over the backs of the sofas to look, all except Jack, who was too careful of his pumpkin head to risk it slipping off his neck. Sure enough, the red houses and fences and trees indicated they were within the domain of Glinda the Good, and presently, as they glided rapidly on, the Tin Woodman recognized the roads and buildings they passed, and altered slightly the flight of the Gump, so that they might reach the palace of the celebrated sorceress. "Good!" cried the Scarecrow delightedly. "We do not need the lost wishing pills now, for we have arrived at our destination." Gradually the thing sank lower and nearer the ground until at length it came to rest within the beautiful gardens of Glinda, settling upon a velvety green lawn close by a fountain, which sent sprays of flashing gems instead of water high into the air, whence they fell with a soft tinkling sound into the carved marble basin placed to receive them. Everything was very gorgeous in Glinda's gardens, and while our voyagers gazed about with admiring eyes, a company of soldiers silently appeared and surrounded them. But these soldiers of the great sorceress were entirely different from those of Jinjur's army of revolt, although they were likewise girls. For Glinda's soldiers wore neat uniforms and bore swords and spears, and they marched with a skill and precision that proved them well trained in the arts of war. The captain commanding this troop, which was Glinda's private bodyguard, recognized the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman at once, and greeted them with respectful salutations. "Good day," said the Scarecrow, gallantly removing his hat, while the Woodman gave a soldierly salute. "We have come to request an audience with your fair ruler." "Glinda is now within her palace awaiting you," returned the captain, "for she saw you coming long before you arrived." "That is strange," said Tip, wondering. "Not at all," answered the Scarecrow, "for Glinda the Good is a mighty sorceress, and nothing that goes on in the land of Oz escapes her notice. I suppose she knows why we came as well as we do ourselves." "Then what was the use of our coming?" asked Jack stupidly. "To prove you are a pumpkin head," retorted the Scarecrow. But if the sorceress expects us, we must not keep her waiting." So they all clambered out of the sofas and followed the captain toward the palace, even the sawhorse taking his place in the queer procession. Upon her throne of finely wrought gold sat Glinda, and she could scarcely repress a smile as her peculiar visitors entered and bowed before her. Both the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman she knew and liked, but the awkward Pumpkinhead and highly magnified Wogglebug were creatures she had never seen before, and they seemed even more curious than the others. As for the Sawhorse, he looked to be nothing more than an animated chunk of wood, and he bowed so stiffly that his head bumped against the floor, causing a ripple of laughter among the soldiers, in which Glinda frankly joined. "I beg to announce to your glorious highness," began the Scarecrow in a solemn voice, "that my Emerald City has been overrun by a crowd of impudent girls with knitting needles, who have enslaved all the men, robbed the streets and public buildings of all their emerald jewels, and usurped my throne." "I know it," said Glinda. "They also threatened to destroy me, as well as all the good friends and allies you see before me," continued the Scarecrow, "and had we not managed to escape their clutches, our days would long since have ended." "I know it," repeated Glinda. "Therefore, I have come to beg your assistance," resumed the Scarecrow, "for I believe you are always glad to succor the unfortunate and oppressed." "That is true," replied the sorceress slowly, "but the Emerald City is now ruled by General Jinjur, who has caused herself to be proclaimed Queen. What right have I to oppose her?" "Why, she stole the throne from me," said the Scarecrow. "And how came you to possess the throne?" asked Glinda. "I got it from the Wizard of Oz, and by the choice of the people," returned the Scarecrow, uneasy at such questioning. "And where did the wizard get it?" she continued gravely. "I am told he took it from Pastoria, the former king," said the Scarecrow, becoming confused under the intent look of the sorceress. "Then," declared Glinda, "the throne of the Emerald City belongs neither to you nor to Jinjur, but to this Pastoria from whom the wizard usurped it." "That is true," acknowledged the Scarecrow humbly. "But Pastoria is now dead and gone, and someone must rule in his place. Pastoria had a daughter, who is the rightful heir to the throne of the Emerald City. Did you know that?" questioned the sorceress. "No," replied the Scarecrow. "But if the girl still lives, I will not stand in her way. It will satisfy me as well to have Jinjur turned out as an impostor as to regain the throne myself. In fact, it isn't much fun to be king, especially if one has good brains. I have known for some time that I am fitted to occupy a far more exalted position. But where is the girl who owns the throne, and what is her name?" "Her name is Ozma," answered Glinda. "But where she is I have tried in vain to discover, for the Wizard of Oz, when he stole the throne from Ozma's father, hid the girl in some secret place, and by means of a magical trick with which I am not familiar, he also managed to prevent her being discovered, even by so experienced a sorceress as myself." "That is strange," interrupted the Wogglebug pompously. "I have been informed that the wonderful Wizard of Oz was nothing more than a humbug." "Nonsense!" exclaimed the Scarecrow, much provoked by this speech. "Didn't he give me a wonderful set of brains?" "There's no humbug about my heart," announced the Tin Woodman, glaring indignantly at the Wogglebug. "Perhaps I was misinformed," stammered the insect, shrinking back. "I never knew the wizard personally." "Well, we did," retorted the Scarecrow, "and he was a very great wizard, I assure you. It is true he was guilty of some slight impostures, but unless he was a great wizard, how, let me ask, could he have hidden this girl Ozma so securely that no one can find her?" I give up," replied the Wogglebug meekly. "That is the most sensible speech you've made," said the Tin Woodman. "I must really make another effort to discover where this girl is hidden," resumed the sorceress thoughtfully. "I have in my library a book in which is inscribed every action of the wizard while he was in our land of Oz, or at least every action that could be observed by my spies. This book I will read carefully tonight, and try to single out the acts that may guide us in discovering the lost Ozma. In the meantime, Pray amuse yourselves in my palace, and command my servants as if they were your own. I will grant you another audience tomorrow." With this gracious speech, Glinda dismissed the adventurers, and they wandered away through the beautiful gardens, where they passed several hours enjoying all the delightful things with which the Queen of the Southland had surrounded her royal palace. On the following morning they again appeared before Glinda, who said to them, "I have searched carefully through the records of the wizard's actions, and among them I can find but 3 that appear to have been suspicious. He ate beans with a knife, made 3 secret visits to old Mombi, and limped slightly on his left foot."
"Ah, that last is certainly suspicious,"
exclaimed the Pumpkinhead. "Not necessarily," said the Scarecrow. "He may have had corns. Now it seems to me that his eating beans with a knife is more suspicious. Perhaps it is a polite custom in Omaha, from which great country the wizard originally came," suggested the Tin Woodman. "It may be," admitted the Scarecrow. "But why," asked Glinda, "did he make 3 secret visits to old Mombi?"
"Ah, why indeed?"
echoed the Wogglebug impressively. "We know that the wizard taught the old woman many of his tricks of magic," continued Glinda, "and this he would not have done had she not assisted him in some way. So we may suspect with good reason that Mombi aided him to hide the girl Ozma, who was the real heir to the throne of the Emerald City, and a constant danger to the usurper. For if the people knew that she lived, they would quickly make her their queen and restore her to her rightful position." "An able argument!" cried the Scarecrow. "I have no doubt that Mombi was mixed up in this wicked business. But how does that knowledge help us?" "We must find Mombi," said Glinda, "and force her to tell us where the girl is hidden." "Mombi's now with Queen Jinjur in the Emerald City," said Tip. "It was she who threw so many obstacles in our pathway and made Jinjur threaten to destroy my friends and give me back into the old witch's power." "Then," decided Glinda, "I will march with my army to the Emerald City and take Mombi prisoner. After that we can perhaps force her to tell the truth about Ozma." "She is a terrible old woman," remarked Tip, with a shudder at the thought of Mombi's black kettle, "and obstinate too." "I am quite obstinate myself," returned the sorceress with a sweet smile, "so I do not fear Mombi in the least. Today I will make all necessary preparations, and we will march upon the Emerald City at daybreak tomorrow." Chapter 21. The Tin Woodman Plucks a Rose. The army of Glinda the Good looked very grand and imposing when it assembled at daybreak before the palace gates. The uniforms of the girl soldiers were pretty and of gay colors, and their silver-tipped spears were bright and glistening, the long shafts being inlaid with mother-of-pearl. All the officers wore sharp, gleaming swords and shields edged with peacock feathers, and it really seemed that no foe could by any possibility defeat such a brilliant army. The sorceress rode in a beautiful palanquin, which was like the body of a coach, having doors and windows with silken curtains, but instead of wheels, which a coach has, the palanquin rested upon 2 long horizontal bars, which were borne upon the shoulders of 12 servants. The Scarecrow and his comrades decided to ride in the Gump, in order to keep up with the swift march of the army. So as soon as Glinda had started, and her soldiers had marched away to the inspiring strains of music played by the royal band, our friends climbed into the sofas and followed. The Gump flew along slowly at a point directly over the palanquin, in which rode the sorceress. "Be careful," said the Tin Woodman to the Scarecrow, who was leaning far over the side to look at the army below. "You might fall."
"It wouldn't matter," remarked the educated Wogglebug. "He can't get broke so long as he is stuffed with money."
"Didn't I ask you?" began Tip in a reproachful voice.
"You did," said the Wogglebug promptly, "and I beg your pardon, I will really try to restrain myself."
"You'd better," declared the boy. "That is, if you wish to travel in our company."
"Oh, I couldn't bear to part with you now," murmured the insect feelingly,
so Tip let the subject drop. The army moved steadily on, but night had fallen before they came to the walls of the Emerald City. By the dim light of the new moon, however, Glinda's forces silently surrounded the city and pitched their tents of scarlet silk upon the greensward. The tent of the sorceress was larger than the others, and was composed of pure white silk, with scarlet banners flying above it. A tent was also pitched for the Scarecrow's party, and when these preparations had been made, with military precision and quickness, the army retired to rest. Great was the amazement of Queen Jinjur the next morning, when her soldiers came running to inform her of the vast army surrounding them. She at once climbed to a high tower of the royal palace, and saw banners waving in every direction, and the great white tent of Glinda standing directly before the gates. "We are surely lost," cried Jinjur in despair, "for how can our knitting needles avail against the long spears and terrible swords of our foes?" "The best thing we can do," said one of the girls, "is to surrender as quickly as possible, before we get hurt." "Not so," returned Jinjur more bravely. "The enemy is still outside the walls, so we must try to gain time by engaging them in parley. Go you with a flag of truce, and ask her why she has dared to invade my dominions, and what are her demands." So the girl passed through the gates, bearing a white flag to show she was on a mission of peace, and came to Glinda's tent. "Tell your queen," said the sorceress to the girl, "that she must deliver up to me old Mombi to be my prisoner. If this is done, I will not molest her farther." Now when this message was delivered to the queen, it filled her with dismay, for Mombi was her chief counselor, and Jinjur was terribly afraid of the old hag. But she sent for Mombi and told her what Glinda had said.
"I see trouble ahead for all of us,"
muttered the old witch, after glancing into a magic mirror she carried in her pocket.
"But we may yet escape by deceiving this sorceress, clever as she thinks herself."
"Don't you think it will be safer for me to deliver you into her hands?" asked Jinjur nervously.
"If you do, it will cost you the throne of the Emerald City," answered the witch positively. "But if you will let me have my own way, it can save us both very easily."
"Then do as you please," replied Jinjur, "for it is so aristocratic to be a queen that I do not wish to be obliged to return home again to make beds and wash dishes for my mother." So Mombi called Jellia Jam to her, and performed a certain magical rite with which she was familiar. As a result of the enchantment, Jellia took on the form and features of Mombi, while the old witch grew to resemble the girl so closely that it seemed impossible anyone could guess the deception.
"Now," said old Mombi to the queen, "let your soldiers deliver up this girl to Glinda. She will think she has the real Mombi in her power, and so will return immediately to her own country in the south."
Therefore, Jellia, hobbling along like an aged woman, was led from the city gates and taken before Glinda. "Here is the person you demanded," said one of the guards, "and our queen now begs you will go away as you promised and leave us in peace." "That I will surely do," replied Glinda, much pleased, "if this is really the person she seems to be." "It certainly is old Mombi," said the guard, who believed she was speaking the truth. And then Jinjur's soldiers returned within the city gates. The sorceress quickly summoned the Scarecrow and his friends to question the supposed Mombi about the lost girl Ozma. But Jellia knew nothing at all of this affair, and presently she grew so nervous under the questioning that she gave way and began to weep, to Glinda's great astonishment. "Here is some foolish trickery," said the sorceress, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is not Mombi at all, but some other person who has been made to resemble her. Tell me," she demanded, turning to the trembling girl, "what is your name?" This Jellia dared not tell, having been threatened with death by the witch if she confessed the fraud. But Glinda, sweet and fair though she was, understood magic better than any other person in the land of Oz, so by uttering a few potent words and making a peculiar gesture, she quickly transformed the girl into her proper shape, while at the same time old Mombi, far away in Jinjur's palace, suddenly resumed her own crooked form and evil features. "Why, it's Jellia Jam!" cried the Scarecrow, recognizing in the girl one of his old friends. "It's our interpreter," said the Pumpkinhead, smiling pleasantly. Then Jellia was forced to tell of the trick Mombi had played, and she also begged Glinda's protection, which the sorceress readily granted. But Glinda was now really angry, and sent word to Jinjur that the fraud was discovered, and she must deliver up the real Mombi, or suffer terrible consequences. Jinjur was prepared for this message, for the witch well understood when her natural form was thrust upon her that Glinda had discovered her trickery, but the wicked old creature had already thought up a new deception, and had made Jinjur promise to carry it out. So the queen said to Glinda's messenger, "Tell your mistress that I cannot find Mombi anywhere, but that Glinda is welcome to enter the city and search herself for the old woman. She may also bring her friends with her if she likes, but if she does not find Mombi by sundown, the sorceress must promise to go away peaceably and bother us no more." Glinda agreed to these terms, well knowing that Mombi was somewhere within the city walls. So Jinjur caused the gates to be thrown open, and Glinda marched in at the head of a company of soldiers, followed by the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, while Jack Pumpkinhead rode astride the Sawhorse, and the educated, highly magnified Wogglebug sauntered behind in a dignified manner. Tip walked by the side of the sorceress, for Glinda had conceived a great liking for the boy. Of course, old Mombi had no intention of being found by Glinda, so while her enemies were marching up the street, the witch transformed herself into a red rose, growing upon a bush in the garden of the palace. It was a clever idea, and a trick Glinda did not suspect, so several precious hours were spent in a vain search for Mombi. As sundown approached, the sorceress realized she had been defeated by the superior cunning of the aged witch, so she gave the command for her people to march out of the city and back to their tents. The Scarecrow and his comrades happened to be searching in the garden of the palace just then, and they turned with disappointment to obey Glinda's command. But before they left the garden, the Tin Woodman, who was fond of flowers, chanced to espy a big red rose growing upon a bush, so he plucked the flower and fastened it securely in the tin buttonhole of his tin bosom. As he did this, he fancied he heard a low moan proceed from the rose, but he paid no attention to the sound, and Mombi was thus carried out of the city and into Glinda's camp, without anyone having a suspicion that they had succeeded in their quest. This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to the Land of Oz. You can find a link to our podcast on the Marshall Public Library webpage, www.marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.